Hello, this is Greg Allison with Green Greg's Garden and Worm Farm, coming to you with a special guest, Ambassador Henry Cooper. He goes by Hank. Uh, Ambassador Cooper has had a lot of activities in his life. He's been appointed as a special ambassador for negotiating treaties and things like that for the United States of America. And one of the things that I most noted, that he was the head of the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization back at a time that I actually worked under. So in a sense, through many chains of commanders, I actually worked under Hank Cooper. And I've appreciated the things he's been doing for the many years, especially in the area of hardening our power grid. Now, I've been on this channel for a long time telling you guys how you can get your grid hardened. And the best example is what he's been doing in his community. Some of you may be aware that I have chaired 2 power grid defense conferences. Well, Ambassador Cooper has been at both of those conferences. He is quite engaged in everything he can do to get our grid hardened. And I think he's accomplished more than anyone because he's got the power companies in the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, both working to get the grids hardened, because he started this from the grassroots. He's the guy who's had the vision to do that. And I'm going to let him explain to you in a moment just how he did that. But I'm going to say, to get more videos on this, I'm going to do a lot more videos on power grid defense, on prep and things you need to do to survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive on this channel. That's my proposition to you. But you can also support this channel by clicking my links below for my affiliate marketing links. Principally right now, if you're not prepping, I would say you need to get going, because if we don't get something done nationwide, our grid's going to go down. And we have other threats to us now. Our food supply is at risk, and a lot of other things, as you may be aware. And there's a lot of strife in this country, and inside and outside internationally. So go to prepwithgreg.com. You can get 4 weeks off of a, excuse me, you can get $100 off of a 4-week long-term storage food supply. It's good for 25 years, 2,000 calories a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, desserts, drinks. It's really delicious food. Buy as many as you can while you can. Get it while the getting's good, because I think the other side, the other eyewall of this storm is coming fast. So with all that said, I'm going to turn this over to Ambassador Cooper. Hank, tell us, what did you do and how did you get the attention to get the ball rolling, to get people in the Carolinas, Duke Power, and all the other affiliated co-ops and companies there involved in getting their grid hardened? So if you can, I'm just going to turn the comm to you. Tell us about it.
Thanks very much, Greg. Well, I'm pleased to do that. And by the way, back when I ran the SDI program, the folks in Huntsville, Alabama were very much a part of that and have been of the missile defense business from the very beginning. As you know, I first worked with them back when I was at Bell Laboratories in the 1960s on the Nike Zeus program. So I'm familiar with the folks down in Alabama and pleased to work with them over the years, and I'm pleased to work with you on this project. Let me just say that I've been worried about EMP for most of my professional career. And frankly, I thought we finally had broken through a barrier back in the early 2000 time period, when Kurt Weldon and Roscoe Bartlett, 2 congressmen on the House Armed Services Committee, became very concerned about the threat to our electric power grid and all our other critical civil infrastructure, and the fact that most people in the United States knew absolutely nothing about this threat. And they got started what was called the EMP Commission, the Electromagnetic Pulse Commission, set up under the Congress with a number of notable commissioners on it, led by Bill Graham. Bill and I were lieutenants together at the Air Force Weapons Laboratory in the early 1960s, when we were just learning about how terribly important this threat from high altitude nuclear explosions was. And the fact was that at that time, all of our strategic systems, our military aircraft, the president's aircraft, the B-52s, the bombers, the ICBMs, SLBMs that we were then building and deploying, were completely vulnerable to this threat, as was the president's ability to communicate with the commanders of those systems and to assure they could continue to operate. Well, we worried about that problem, actually developed simulators because we quit testing nuclear weapons in the early 60s, actually partially as a consequence of learning that our estimates of what this threat might be were grossly low. And on a test called Starfish Prime, 1962, the summer of 1962. And everything went very classified at that point because what we were already operating was very vulnerable. And we worried about fixing those key strategic systems, but we did absolutely nothing to protect the critical civil infrastructure to support our citizenry and all of the functions that they rely upon. We bet everything on the idea that if the Russians ever attacked us, they would probably try to take down our communication systems and so on with EMP. So we wanted to make sure that those systems were protected so that we could retaliate against an attack out of the Soviet Union. And the idea was that we would deter them completely and so that they wouldn't attack us in the first place. And that became actually embodied in law. And we started off mentioning SDI and so on, and we couldn't, by law, protect the American people against an attack, which I have never appreciated and understood, and I was appalled by it. That's how I got interested in arms control. In fact, when Henry Kissinger in whatever it was, 1972, I guess it was, gave a press conference in Moscow explaining why the ABM treaty was good for us, because he said we couldn't compete with the Soviets and this would keep our systems and their systems mutually vulnerable, and that would deter the war in the first place. Well, I thought it was un-American then, still do, not to protect the American people. Nevertheless, that is what we did, and we operated that way for decades. As I said, in the early 70s, we had a couple of congressmen that thought this was a terrible idea, constituted a commission to look into it and what it would take, first of all, what the vulnerabilities were and what it would take to fix them. And then the reports of this commission were delivered. I think the first one was in 2004, something like that, to a closed session of Congress. And there was a limited unclassified report that was produced. And so a few years later, the commission was reestablished and a lot of things were declassified. I think you've had Peter Pry on your broadcast, and Peter was the executive director, I guess, of the EMP Commission. Bill Graham was my friend, as I mentioned earlier, and has worked on the EMP issues since our days together in the Air Force in the early 60s. So that commission went public, made it public. As I said, I think the first of the completely published reports was in 2008 or 9 or something like that. And I quit worrying about it at that point, frankly. I helped Peter persuade Congressman Weldon, who was then leading the R&D part of the House Armed Services Committee, to undertake this. And I thought that would be enough to wake people up and then we'd be working. A few years later, I discovered that Washington had done nothing. And so I got engaged again with High Frontier, which is an organization that's been associated with missile defense from Ronald Reagan's days on these issues, and has been actively involved in things in Huntsville as well. And so we decided we would take this on and try to begin to work it from the bottom up, is the way I refer to it, because Washington had completely failed. And when I say Washington, I mean the executive branch as well as the Congress. They were doing absolutely nothing on this issue of any consequence. And so after batting my head against that wall for another year or so, I decided we'd have to start at the bottom. And I'm a Clemson graduate. I know you Alabama folks. We have a little thing going between us on the football field. I don't know whether we're going to get to play this year or not. I sure hope so. But But in any case, I went to Clemson because that was where I graduated, and I went to the head of the engineering, the electrical engineering computer science group there, and asked him to tell me the names of some of his graduates at Duke, not Duke University, Duke Energy Power Company, which is one of the nation's largest power companies. And it has infrastructure throughout South Carolina, North Carolina, west all the way into Indiana, I believe it is. And so it's a very large company. It has lots of nuclear plants, hydroelectric plants, and so on. And the so-called bulk power grid, which consists of the power sources like those and these high tension lines that you see operating across the country that deliver electricity down to something on the order of 100 megavolts, I guess it is. And so that's, so the bottom line of that was we, in fact, met some key people there. Probably the most important contact was a vice president of operations with Duke Engineering, who was a Clemson graduate. But more important than that, his uncle was my first football coach when I was in high school years earlier, and his family still lives in North Augusta, South Carolina, where I was a kid. And so that connection really established great rapport. And their engineers and our folks have been working together ever since. And we agreed to work in a county, York County in northern South Carolina. It's next to Charlotte. In fact, Rock Hill, which is the fourth largest city, I believe, in South Carolina, is among other things, a bedroom community for Charlotte, which is where Duke Energy's corporate headquarters is located. That's also where Siemens has a major headquarters, which is the cyber threat related activities, which can be tied with this. Bottom line, from all of those discussions, we began about 5 years ago in a meeting with key people. The first person I asked to meet in York County was the sheriff. And the reason I wanted to meet with him is because he's elected by the people. And it's been our experience that the people that we talk to about this issue want to do something about it. They're frustrated when they learn the government is doing nothing about it. And so I wanted to get people involved in dealing with the problem, specifically who would be responsive to the American people in dealing with it. So that was my first step in trying to go bottom up. And the Duke people and we had agreed on York County because they have these three power companies on power sources on Lake Wylie, which is on the Catawba River running between North and South Carolina. The nuclear plants are, in my judgment, the most important. I think they're judged by most people to be the energy sources, because if we don't protect them, then they become potential Fukushimas, like the power plant in Japan that went berserk due to, just failures without going into the technical details. And the radiation was spread all the way into the United States out of that. You can imagine what it would be like with nearly 100 power plants in the United States, most of them in the eastern part of the United States, if they were to have that situation and begin spreading radiation hazard throughout the nation. So it's very important that they be kept safe. And nuclear plant is on Lake Wylie. Go ahead, you had a question? I can't hear you. You're muted, I think.
So I'd like to chime in on that, we have to worry about the spent fuel rod pools. You know, most people, when they think about a nuclear power plant, they just think about the reactors. But the amount of fuel in the spent fuel rod pools is about 80,000 metric tons in the United States alone. And that is such a degree that it's over 300 times the material on all the warheads on the planet. So if that was to cook off, and it's under 20 foot of water in these spent fuel rod pools, but they evaporate about 160 gallons a minute. And so you have to have ginormous pumps pumping this water in continuously, and they're run by electricity. Now they have backup generators to keep them going, but that's only as good as long as the fuel lasts. And with the grid down, the trucks won't be able to deliver fuel too long because they can't pump their fuel, and they got to have a supply chain to support the network of trucks. And if things get really bad, the trucks themselves will be a target, like in a Mad Max movie. So there's a lot to be done to make sure that we keep this safe at the nuclear power plants, especially for the spent fuel rods. At least in the reactor, they can inject a lot of boron into it, and it is contained in the containment building. It's not the case, though, for the spent fuel rod pools. So a lot of people don't realize, but that's probably the biggest danger. And
it is.
It's totally neglected. And
you're absolutely correct. And that's the top priority objective in keeping the nuclear plant safe, is to make sure the water flows. There's plenty of water around for most of the nuclear plants because they're beyond, in this case, Lake Wylie, but assuring that you can operate them in the hydroelectric plant is the source of energy. The other thing you have to have in order to restart the nuclear plant, which will shut down if there is a major power loss, that triggers a scram so that they shut down for safety reasons. But then the problem is exactly what you said, to keep them safe. And the wastewater pools are critical to that project. In the case of York County, that's the critical role of the hydroelectric plant, which can produce like 50 megawatts of energy. And the nuclear plant, of course, puts up 2,000 or so megawatts. And that is the nuclear energy is the largest. I guess it's about a half of South Carolina's electricity comes from nuclear power. Some states have more. I think it's the third largest after Pennsylvania, and Illinois, I believe, is top. But in any case, that was the notion we began with. And then to keep them safe, it means that you have to have a loading condition for these plants to work against. And in the case of York County, an awful lot of that is not under the purview of Duke Energy. I'm sure they're going to do everything they can to take care of the problem, but over 95% of the grid that supports the citizenry of York County in South Carolina is operated by a co-op and a utility company. And it turns out that the leaders of both of those companies are Clemson men. And this connection turned out to be very important to me. The Adjutant General's office full of graduates who were Clemson men. And that tie, the university tie, was worth more than any bureaucratic anointment you would get from Washington or even the state capitol. Because we had that common heritage, and they would listen on that basis to get started. And then when you got into the details of the engineering, and these folks were engineers, some of them electrical engineers. When I started it, our adjutant general was a Georgia Tech man, but he was also an electrical engineer. So it meant we built a network of individuals who happened to be in key places in South Carolina and have worked together. I also had friends from my history who worried about these issues, and in the Department of Defense had responsibilities in developing the procedures that we use to protect our military systems, and overviewed assessing them. And I was able to persuade some of them to come and meet with the key leaders in York County and do an independent assessment of the distribution grid of York County, and got what I believe are very credible cost estimates for protecting the grid, which amounts to less than $100 per citizen of York County, one-time cost to protect the grid. And you need some more just to assure that it stays in a protected condition. But that's something everybody can afford. I took my wife out to dinner just earlier this week, and I spent more than $100 for a very nice dinner up here. So I don't put myself in the same position as necessarily as everybody. I mean, I'm pretty reasonably well off, so I can afford to do that frequently if I want. But the citizens of York County can afford that too. So money is not the problem. Clearly, money is not the problem. Our problem in protecting the grid is entirely bureaucratic. We now have, I think, the people in York County lined up with us. We had a physician retired who seems to know everybody that matters in York County, whether it's the mayor of the cities and the, and the representative in Washington and the representatives to Columbia and so on. And nothing I've done particularly other than try to prod to get this started. It's taken care of itself because we've gotten key citizens who know others who are engaged in working it. And we're now at the stage of trying to persuade the powers that be in Washington to give those folks enough funds. I've been doing this pro bono. I'm now a great grandfather, and I'm doing this for my kids and their kids and grandkids now because our country's in trouble. If we don't fix this problem, we're going to have major disaster, either directly from what an enemy does to us or from nature and what the sun does to us. It's going to happen. It's just not clear when. And so I think what we've got in South Carolina, if we can validate it with independent analyses and then do a broader plan to take it by way of the National Guard. I count on them as playing a key role in this, and the adjutant generals in all of our states in doing it. And I don't mind having Washington try to figure out how they can help, but I don't want to wait on Washington. I really want the resources out of them. They surely can provide that to let the local and state officials do what is their job to do in protecting our people. We know how to do it. In South Carolina, I mentioned there were two of these municipal and co-ops responsible for the electricity. We have 40 something counties in South Carolina, and each county has at least one, sometimes two of these co-ops. And so, I mean, the individuals in York County are members of, groups, professional groups throughout the state. And if we have a story to tell up there, they'll help us get it around to the rest of the people in the state. And I've already mentioned, we've tied into North Carolina from the very beginning. We had representatives of the disaster management folk in North Carolina engaged in what we're doing in York County and have done, as well as the South Carolina folks. So we have a model to pursue. Are you not a part of the InfraGard group, the National Defense, whatever it is, Resilience group?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm definitely a part of the InfraGard group.
I beg your pardon?
Yes, I am a member of InfraGard.
That's what I thought. Well, they are putting out a powering through document, and I have written an appendix describing what we've done in York County. And so this is a plug for them. It should be coming out within the next, month or so, I would think. So it's something your viewers and folks that you interact with might be interested in when it does come out.
Okay, very good. Also, I'd like to chime in. You talked about the Adjutant General. For those that aren't aware, the Adjutant General is the head of your state National Guard. And Ambassador Cooper is quite involved with the Adjutant General's organization and can assist with the various states through that. How they play a role, a lot of people aren't aware of this, but if the grid goes down and if you've got to get fuel trucks to these spent fuel rod pools, somebody's got to escort these trucks because they're going to be targets. But not only does the trucks have to be escorted, but you've got to have spare parts for them. You've got to have maintenance to keep these things going. And maybe there would have to be military trucks involved in some of this because they probably have a better maintenance echelon to maintain things over the long term. But the supply chain will be ravished when there's no power grid because we order everything over the internet these days. It's just a very process of ordering. The parts stores and everything is run electronically. How do you maintain all this stuff? How do you keep it going? I mean, a truck doesn't last long without seals and tires and wires and these things break down all the time, and you just want to keep that going. And you got to have the fuel pumps. The fuel don't pump without power to pump it. Now you can put backup generators at some of these truck stops military installations. But the biggest thing that the adjutant general is going to have to make sure of is that the security staff that's escorting these trucks and providing security throughout the state, protect the people, they're going to have some place for their families to go, because people aren't going to stay on duty and escort trucks and maintain security of the people if they're worried about somebody kicking the door in a home and taking mama and the kids. I mean, for Pete's sake, look what happened in New Orleans. I believe a third of the force was off the force in 3 days flat. They were home taking care of mom and the kids. And, you know, you give it a few weeks, there won't be hardly anybody left to keep any kind of security going. So we've got to make sure that they're either able to provide people to go to the houses and watch after the families, or that the families have an option to go to a secure place to stay when all this stuff is going down. Most National Guard armories aren't especially big, but at least they're in a fenced compound. You've got a yard or some way to kind of have typically a big training area indoors. So there's ways to accommodate some people in an emergency situation. Hopefully we can do better. There's a lot of military bases. I know here in Huntsville area, we have the Redstone Arsenal. A lot of the housing is actually empty now because we don't have the troops that we used to have. So there's a lot of options on different military bases. I'm sure the military would be willing to cooperate with the National Guard on some of these things because it's an invested interest too. A lot of the military bases are getting most of their power from the civilian community. And
essentially all.
Yeah.
Essentially all their power comes from the private sector. And you're absolutely correct. And there's 2,000 or 3,000 of these little co-ops and municipal companies across the country that play a critical role. And they are regulated by state regulatory bodies. So there's 50 of them. And then on top of that, you got an overlay of the federal, whatever it is, FERC stands for, Electric Reliability Commission, I guess it is. And then they don't do any analysis. That's done by a 501c3 nonprofit organization called NERC, and that's Nuclear Energy Reliability Corporation, I think it is, or something. And that's a self-looking ice cream cone. You know, it's owned by the operating companies, in effect. They pay the bills for the operation of this, and they do the analyses to regulate their own activities. And on top of that, for the nuclear plants, which are critically important, you've got a Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So we've got layers of regulators. And maybe they're coordinated, but I haven't seen much coordination that's really very helpful in dealing with this problem. Absolutely key to dealing with this. I'm absolutely persuaded, and I think my friends at Duke agree with this, that the most important element is to get enough citizens to understand that it's not only that it's a problem, and I find there's no problem in getting that message across, but that there's a solution, and the solution is not terribly expensive, and they should demand their leadership to do it, including the National Guard. I'll tell you another story. The first meeting I had, and I insisted on working with the Adjutant General from the very beginning in South Carolina. And he sent his planner, who was a National Guard colonel, to this first meeting that we had to discuss what the issues and what we might do to begin to deal with them. And I'm not picking at him in particular, but just to describe the nature of the situation. And we said to him, and Duke people were there, and I had a friend from Washington who really was very knowledgeable about it, join us. And we talked about what would happen, and we said to him, what would you do? You know, you're National Guard, you're in charge of plans and programs. And he said, well, we wouldn't do anything if we lost all the electricity until we got instructions. And I said, what do you mean instructions? And he said, well, Washington or Columbia, somebody will have to tell us what to do. And I said, how are they going to tell you? Well, what communication system do you have? In this hardening activity we've gone through in York County, we've looked at that issue for the emergency communications throughout the state of South Carolina. Because if you depend on the normal system, it's likely not to be there. And so one of the things we determined very beginning of this discussion by involving that guy with the Guard was that if you're going to be serious about this problem, you've got to educate the people who are in charge of plans. and so that it becomes a part of their thinking. And otherwise, you know, that guy's going to do what anybody would do. He's going to take care of his family. I asked him in this meeting, he said, where do you live, by the way? And he's the planner for the operations of the Guard in the state of South Carolina. And he said Camden, which I don't know exactly. It's 60 or 70 miles from Columbia, which is where the Adjutant General's office is. And if this were to happen when he's at home and he can't communicate, what's he going to do? He's going to take care of his family, which he's going to maybe do anyway if he doesn't have a plan. And, you know, plans are important. They don't solve the problem, but without a plan in an issue as complicated as this one is, I think we're just whistling Dixie by the graveyard. You know, that's a metaphor that maybe I shouldn't use anymore. But anyway, that shows my age.
All right. So what Ambassador Cooper is talking about here is working this thing from the grassroots up. He was the one that schooled us and told us in this community. He told us directly, said, look, if you want to get your grid hardened, go to your local EMA people, go to your state EMA people, go to the adjutant generals, and ask them to do a real exercise for what they have to deal with if the grid goes down. The kind of questions he's asking his adjutant general, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to wait till I hear something. How are you going to hear it? And they haven't really gone through this. I've heard so many people say, well, if it happens, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. But when you think it through, or these guys have the plan in place, they've got the doctrine, the books. But when you go talk to the adjutant generals, when you talk to the people in charge of the National Guard, when you go talk to the people in charge of the various emergency management associations, you find this is really not the case. I've had so many people, including some sergeant majors, saying, hey, this is taken care of because blah, 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 blah. But when you dig in, it's not.
No, it's not. I'll tell you another horror story. As I said, we were working with the National Guard from the very beginning, well over 5 years ago in South Carolina. And one of the things that was done fairly early on, for 2 years running, we tried to get Northcom to include EMP as a part of their Vigilant Guard exercises that they do every year. Unsuccessfully, we couldn't get the people in Colorado Springs who are responsible. You know, they're the ones who man our missile defense programs, operations, and so on. Couldn't get them even to include it in the plans that the country has, exercises that the country has to do, that the National Guard has to be prepared to deal with. 2 years running, and we gave up. And that was actually before I decided to begin the bottom-up approach that we began pursuing up in York County.
That was a brilliant thing that you did there, because everybody else is trying to take it from the national government side, and then we started working the state government side. You know, we got nowhere the national government, state governments were finding that the utilities were getting in there with NERC and FERC and EFRI, and they were fighting us every step of the way in everything we did. I mean, we get states to actually agree to do things, but then these organizations would come in and find a way to throw gum in works. I've heard so many people, well, this state is doing this and that state's doing that. Yeah, well, they started, but most of them haven't gotten anywhere with it because these other agencies come in and threw monkey wrenches in the machinery. But what Ambassador Cooper's done here is he's come up in the grassroots and within the structure of these organizations and got them to decide to change the mind and push for it internally. And it's working. So there is a success path here, and he's found it. And that's why I wanted him on this channel, because you can be involved in these kind of things yourself. Now, you know, maybe you don't have all the contacts. You need to play football for the guy who's in charge of something. Probably know somebody that has or does. Build an alliance.
Exactly right.
On your side. There's people, hey, we're all in this together. There's people everywhere that care about their grandkids, that care about their kids, that want a future. And maybe they don't realize how at risk our future is, but it really is at risk. Because what he's told us is that if we don't do something, our grid will go down. But whether you believe that we'd get an EMP attack or not, that Mother Nature will do it to us if we don't do something about it. The sun will fry our grid. We've got a CME coming at us right now. I think tonight or tomorrow it's going to be coming through, but it's just a glancing blow, luckily for us. It just so happens also the Earth's magnetic field is dropping dramatically in field strength. That's our shield that protects us from these kind of things. And what that means is it may not take a Carrington level event to take out our power grid. Something much smaller may do the job. It was thought that even an event the size of the 1921 railroad event could take down a grid, but it could be that something is no bigger than the event that took down the Quebec power grid in 1989, which is about 1/10 of the Carrington event. That might do the job. So we don't know. Maybe it's less than 1/10. It's more like 1/10 of the railroad event, which is 1/10 of the Carrington event. Maybe it's 100th of that power. But we have the potential of losing our grid, and it's getting bigger. And our grid is getting more vulnerable. The smarter it gets, the more vulnerable it gets. This is why we need to wake up. And also, it's not just the adjutant generals and the EMA. You work with the sheriff's organizations, work with the power companies, anybody and everybody you know that's at the grassroots, start talking to them. The state troopers in your state will be involved. I mean, surely you know somebody involved in law enforcement or a fireman, somebody that's in the EMA community. But here's what I found. I've had no trouble approaching people in the EMA community. And with my, I formed a group here locally, and we've been able to reach out. These people are interested. They want to protect their future. A lot of them are already worried about this and are just wondering, how are we going to get this message across? If you form just even a small group of interested people, you're showing citizens concern, and they will pay more attention to you. You can get, I've had people from my mayor's office send people to my conference that I had here, and they were quite interested in this. We have had public services commissioners involved. I've had them come to my conference, and you've heard Ambassador Cooper talk about Dr. Peter Pry. He's been on my channel. I've got Dr. Pry and Dr. Steve Nixon, and I went down to Montgomery at a meeting orchestrated by the head of the EMA here in the state of Alabama. And we also had special projects coordinator for Governor Kay Ivey there. We had members from Alabama Power there. We had several EMA people. We had the top public service commission in the state of Alabama, whose name is Twinkle Kavanaugh. She is a very popular person in the state, and she is the head of the Public Services Commission in the state of Alabama. It's an elected position, so they will be more inclined to listen to you. But you can still lobby and appeal to people, even when they're not in an elected position, especially if they're really service-oriented and trying to help. But there's always going to be those with NERC and FERC and the companies who are going to try to push back. They don't want to change anything. They want to keep things as they are. So that's why we have to be resilient and just keep pushing. And that is what Ambassador Cooper has done. He has found a way to make this work, and it is happening in the Carolinas. So if nothing else, this may be the Carolina country, the country of Carolina when it's all said and done. It may be the only place that's got any lights going on. Everybody else may be starving to death. But if we're smart, we'll listen to what Ambassador Cooper has brought to us, and we will take this around the country and get our grid hardened. And so that we won't have to look east toward the Carolinas to see a glimmer of light somewhere.
Well, I hope we can work through organizations like NARUC, the organization of the adjutant generals across the country. If we can get them to engage on this issue in a sensible way, that's one of the ways of proliferating it. But I think we need more activities like what we've done in South Carolina, bottom up. If you try to enter too high in the system, and I'm not sure what too high is, even trying to do it at the state level may be too high, because this is a very complicated matter. And I can just tell you, I like to give the example back in the days. Your listeners know what the Minuteman system is, right? Our intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Well, I know what a Minuteman missile is.
Right.
I'm not sure everybody else does, but we, when I was working in SDI, we had this thing called the ERIS Project Office.
I'm familiar with it, yeah.
System. I know you are. And we were using a Minuteman missile to launch our vehicle.
Right, that's right. Well, anyway, the Minutemen are deployed in silos. Once upon a time, we had 1,100 of them deployed around the nation, silos. And in those early days, when we were working EMP and trying to get that system hardened, I like to tell a story to illustrate the nature of the problem. One of the things we discovered fairly early on, if you ever go to a Minuteman silo, you'll see it has a door that slides off. And when it closes, there's a copper ring that closes and encloses the missile inside of a Faraday cage. If you know, I'm sure you know what that is, but that protects you against EMP. Well, the maintenance crews thought they would be helping to paint that copper ring, which, to make it look nice. And of course, that destroyed the Faraday cage.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, and it turns out there are a lot of maintenance problems that get generated in very complicated systems if you aren't careful. And so it's not enough just to harden it. You've got to make sure that it's maintained in a hardened configuration once you get there. And if you're smart about the way you go about designing the system, you can minimize the troubles that you'll have in maintenance. But if you aren't careful, any place you go into an operating room and you got all sorts of wires hanging around and pipes going in and out, those are just pathways for high frequency EMP components into the system. So, it's a very complicated matter, and dealing with a complicated matter means you have to pay attention to details. And that's part of the reason I think we have to get bottom up in addressing the problem as well. People to understand what they need to do and in fact take a leading role in making it happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that believe they can buy a little chintzy device for their house that's going to protect their house from getting fried when you get a huge surge from the EMP coming in. They don't know about voltage division. Yeah, you may have a path to ground. It may be more resistant on the other side. That path to ground is only so big, and that wire and the ground wire in the house isn't big enough to take the surge of an EMP. That's what a lot of people don't realize. It may take lightning to a point, but a full EMP surge is going to really stress that, and you're still going to get a huge voltage current surge actually coming in your house. Even if when you break a circuit, even wide open several feet, you get look at the power stations. They're big switches. They have switches that disconnect and swing through the air 20 feet, and you'll see a lightning bolt following the whole length. So these people think they got a little chintzy device with some platinum and some cheap components with some little bitty wires no bigger than this. And because some lab tested it for some small range of the threat they're going to see, they think they're going to have all this protection.
No. Well, it's like, the cell phone. You have cell phone.
Right.
People have asked me when I'm talking, what about the cell phone? Will it be okay, an EMP? And chances are, if it's like this, it's going to be okay. But if you got it if you got it plugged in, like this, then you got an antenna. and that's a pathway for the EMP pulse to get into the system and destroy, and fry the key components of the electronics. So those kind of details matter. And if you aren't careful, you'll have a hardened system when you thought you'd worked hard to make it. I mean, you'll have a soft system when you think you've worked hard to make it hard. So. Well,
and another thing a lot of people aren't aware of for national defense, you talked about Dr. Graham that you worked with and worked for. He testified to Congress in, I believe, 2008. And he talked about the EMP super weapons, and it got in the congressional record. I know some of us thought this was classified information, and then we discovered it was published in the congressional record. And so that gave us the free, open ability to discuss this. But it turns out what the Soviet generals, ex-Soviet generals, told them after the wall fell is that they had EMP super weapons in the Soviet Union. And they had the technology. Still, Russia has this, and they said North Korea has this, and China's got it. They
said they accidentally gave it to North Korea.
Yeah, right. But the EMP super weapon is stated to have the capability to put 200,000 volts per meter on a line. And the military hard spec is 50,000 volts per meter. That's 4 times the rad hard or the EMP hard spec of the hardened facilities. So, and also these facilities don't operate in a vacuum. Today, a commander can't just, even if he had the capability to launch, he can't launch without authorization. And the communication systems that would give him that authorization would be non-existent, even if he can make his systems work.
That's right. That's why we put those systems at the top of the priority list in the 60s. to make sure the president could get the command. And we used to fly airplane all the time with the commander or representative, actually, of the commander of the Strategic Air Command on board because we were concerned about this problem. So, I mean, it really is a serious matter, and most people don't appreciate it, don't understand it. And
back then, based on Starfish Prime, you thought you were looking at 30,000 volts per meter. You didn't realize it was 200,000 volts per meter.
The other thing that's important about the super EMP weapon is that they're low yield. They're not high explosive yield. And there are many people who believe you've got to have megatons weapons, you know, very large weapons, because I think the Starfish Prime was 1.4 megatons. So it was a very large yield weapon, and it caused damage in Hawaii some 900 miles away, electronic damage. And people think you've got to have that big yield weapon in order to create this problem. Not so. A few tens of tons of weaponry, an EMP weapon, a kiloton or so, could be enough to cause
Actually,
great
the
damage.
smaller weapons are more efficient at generating the gamma rays because the larger weapons have more shielding for all the radioactive materials they have in them. So that shielding inhibits the gamma rays. If you're trying to maximize the gamma rays, the smaller weapons are more efficient. Weapons in the size range of the stuff that North Korea was already testing early on.
Well, that's what people were saying. Well, they're not there yet because they're all little yield weapons that they're testing. Well, maybe that's right. And then on the other hand, maybe they were testing the one that we really ought to be most worried about. So, and I think there were 50 kiloton weapons. I don't remember what the yield was. There weren't large yield weapons. They were sort of the yield that we used to call tactical nuclear weapons in the days of Europe.
And that's big enough. A lot of people say, well, you know, don't worry about them because they don't have the reentry interceptor. They don't have the reentry technology developed. They don't have the targeting technology. You don't need any of that when you're doing an EMP over the middle of the country. One, you're not going to reenter. And
Right.
two, you don't have to have precision targeting. And three, you will do more damage with an EMP super weapon than you would with a fleet of ICBMs striking cities directly. It won't be
most people. The other thing that's key in this is to understand that, you know, I said we've hardened the key military systems, but when we don't harden the civil infrastructure, then our bases are mostly vulnerable because they depend on the electricity that's produced off the civil grid. And, you know, it may be that we'll have the key military posts associated with protecting our strategic systems hardened in Omaha and a few other places, but the average military base is not protected.
Well, I'm concerned if we had a surprise attack from the CCP or somebody like that, yes, that we may not be able to respond. If they take us out with an EMP first, we may not have any response that we're capable of mounting. A lot of people say, they won't do it because we'll do this and that to them. Don't be so confident of that. I wouldn't be confident with that at all.
Well, we're supposed to keep those systems hardened, Greg. I can't swear to you that that's the case now. I've been away from having hands-on on that for a great many years. But once upon a time, we were dead serious about doing regular inspections and assessments of the operating systems that support our key military retaliatory capabilities.
For those watching this video, you're looking at the man who's in charge of this stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot of other YouTube channels bring people to their channel, or they tell you they know somebody that knows somebody that's in the Pentagon. Guys, I bring you the man, Ambassador Henry
Cooper. I appreciate you saying that. I'm getting a little old and long in the tooth, we used to say, right?
Well, you've been there, you've done it, you've lived it, you worked it, you've been an advocate and a patriot, and you're doing everything you can to maintain the capacity for this country to remain free and independent. So
I'll tell you one more thing that demonstrates how I care about it. You mentioned earlier that I was in charge of the Strategic Defense Initiative. Most of the systems, missile defense systems that we have deployed today, and the Israelis for that matter, and the Japanese, were systems that began on my watch. And I was so worried about this EMP issue and having an independent group that oversaw what we were doing besides our engineers who were tuned to deal with it. And I forget exactly what it was. I think I cut $500 million or something like that out of my budget. I got Dick Cheney, who was the Secretary of Defense, to approve my doing it and send it to in those days, the Defense Nuclear Agency, which is where the expertise in the Department of Defense on EMP really was located, so that they would, and I didn't tell them how to spend it. I said, I want you to have independent capability to oversee what our engineers are doing to make sure that our systems are protected against EMP. Now, I can't guarantee that that's been maintained since those years, because when the Democrats came in the Clinton administration, they canceled all the main programs we had, including the ground-based interceptor programs that Huntsville was in charge of in those days. They told the contractors to send the people at Huntsville to send the contracts unopened back to the contractors that were sitting there to begin a demonstration validation phase of the ground-based interceptor system. So they really gutted an awful lot of our missile defense programs in those days, and I'm not certain of what has transpired since then. I hope that our missile defense programs have been hardened. They should have been, and they're advertised to be. But if we aren't checking it regularly, I'd worry about them too. You might tell your friends in Huntsville, pay attention.
Well, the main missile base is Fort Greely, Alaska. That was my last duty base when I was in the Army.
I see. There you go.
We didn't have missiles there at the time, but I definitely spent 2 years at the home of the rugged professional. We called it the home of the ragged professional, by the way.
I went by up there, talked to the local folk when they were clearing the land to put in the sites at Greeley. So yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, it was a beautiful country up there. So yeah, I do worry about the grid. You know, Fort Greely used to have its own nuclear power plant, and it was shut down. And my good friend, who you also know, Ed Kiker, was involved in burying the reactor core for that plant. So yeah, Ed was instrumental in that. He's also been an instrumental person in my Power Grid Defense Committee here in Huntsville, Alabama. So the thing to take home from this is, if you look at Ambassador Cooper here, what he's told you is he does this out of his own pocket. And that's what we're all doing. We're all pushing to get our grid hardened. This is something we're doing as volunteers because we care about our future. We care about our country, our kids, our grandkids. And we want a future. And we know we can have a bright future, but we can't afford to lose it due to malfeasance and negligence of the system that's in place now. There's a lot of people that just don't want to change things, and so we're pushing to make that happen. You, as the watcher, you, the viewer, can get involved in that, and just take action and do things like what Peter Price told us in the videos with him. You've heard me interview General Ken Chrosniak. We've got Ambassador Henry Cooper here. You can go to your local people. You can go to your MAs. You can start local groups. Seek out other organizations that are involved in these things. Ambassador Cooper and I are both involved in a weekly telecon for a group called Secure the Grid. And there's InfraGuard. Now, you do have to pass some security checks to be an InfraGuard. It's about like getting a secret clearance, what you have to get approved to do to be inside that organization. But that enables you to help and assist in these activities. So there are a lot you can do. And I do include all that information in my videos. You can start also by just contacting your local congressman and saying, hey, make these agencies do their job to get the grid hardened. We've already passed the laws, but the agencies are dragging their feet. We've got groups like EFRI out there that are publishing all kind of nonsense. They get some business major to tell you that everything's safe when the electrical engineers and physicists who are looking at it are saying, no, it's not. We know darn better. But they're out there with all these little politicians and bureaucrats coming, oh, no, we looked at this and we said, it's all okay. Wink, wink, wink. No, it's not. We know better, right?
That's right. You got it right. Tell your folks if they want, sometime they want more information on what we're doing, go to my webpage at highfrontier.org. That's HIGHFRONTIER. And there's a scroll up there. You can look down and just look up Wake Lake Wiley, and you'll see a lot of stuff that's published.
I will put the link to your website in the show notes for this video. And also you can email me at greg@powergriddefense.org. And I'll collect a list of names for people interested in this, and I'll find somebody to pass them on to so we can get you plugged in.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, we're trying to work this. We're trying to make things happen. On a side note, I've started another group. I'm president of a group called the Freedom Restoration Foundation. I just released a video on that. We're just basically fighting for our freedoms that are under attack across the board these days. And you know, everything that we cherish and have held dear in this country forever is under assault across, you know, from every angle you look these days. So we're trying to do something about that too. You can go back and check that video. So is there anything else you'd like to say about what people can do themselves?
Well, as I really have said, the most important thing is inform yourself enough to understand, one, that this is really a serious problem. Two, that things can be done about it, and we know what they are. We've been doing it for decades for some military systems. And three, it's quite affordable to do. And people who are out there telling you how expensive it is and how complicated it is and so on don't know what they're talking about. We've been doing it for decades for some systems, and we need to do it for the critical civil infrastructure as well, using the same methodology.
Well, $100 one-time cost amortized over some period of time is essentially nothing. It's just a bare ripple on your electric bill. You wouldn't hardly see it, and maybe we could even get some of this covered by some future infrastructure act from the federal government. But in the meantime, we don't want to wait on that. That puts us at risk. Also, just speaking about the base, military base power, we had a friend in General Quast with the Air Force who was trying to start an initiative to get the military bases to put in their own microgrid with these mini nukes, which plants, which are, you know, they can't go into meltdown. The fuel is safe with those plants. They were trying to get a system started that would enable at least them to have power and maybe even help the civilian communities come back up to some degree. But he kind of ran a roadblock, and he's no longer in the service. So
no, that's right. He unfortunately, the powers that be in the Air Force didn't have the good sense to give him a 4-star, so he had to fail out with 3 stars. Really good man, and he's still actively engaged in working on these issues and on space related issues as well, both of which ought to be of interest to the folks down in Alabama. And your senior senator down there could have a lot to say about this. And if your listeners and viewers know Dick Shelby, he may not remember him. I knew him when he was a junior senator.
Oh, yeah.
I know quite well, and I was in Geneva because he used to visit us all the time there. But in those days, Judge Heflin was the senior senator, and I got to know him too.
I'll help him. So, you know, I've been quite involved in space for years myself. I was chairman of the executive committee of the National Space Society. I spent 10 years as chairman of the policy committee. And, you know, I've run the halls of Congress myself. I even wrote this article talking about how we had a major coup kind of preserving the space launch system and enabling commercial space. And I called it Constellations, Cancellation, Congress, and Camels. Yeah, camels worked their way into that article too. You know, the old adage, you know, how do you get a camel in the tent? You know, if the camel gets his nose in the tent, the rest is sure to follow. Sometimes you just got to get things started. And I think that's what we need here. We just need to get things started. We got to get the nose of our camel in the tent and then just push it on through. But we got to get it started.
Right. Well, you guys have a nucleus there in Huntsville. That's where your main office is, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And you got a lot of technical people there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I told you the most important single individual in York County for us was a retired physician who learned how important this was, and he seems to know everybody that matters up there. And he's the guy who's made everything happen locally. I can't claim credit for that. I've been a prodder.
Well,
People are doing it themselves.
Well, and for people that want to educate themselves, you can start on my channel. You go to my YouTube channel. I've got a whole playlist on power grid defense. You can go through that and look at videos about the power grid and learn what the causes are, what can be the root causes to lose our grid. And there's several, that's the scary thing. There's several ways to take our grid down. And you can learn the consequences. How bad can it be when our grid goes down? And I talk about at some length the spent fuel rod plants. I've had people that were engineers at nuclear power plants. Oh, no, that can't happen. But I've got the test results from the Sedan National Laboratory showing how those rods will indeed burn on contact with air. I've got the test results, and I show them in my video, by the way. So you can see all of that and learn and appreciate just how critical it is that we get this job done. So I ask you to join with us to make it happen. And I really thank you, Ambassador Cooper, for everything you've done and continue to do. You are a true patriot, and I'm glad to have served up under your wise guidance in the strategic defense community once upon a time.
Well, I'm pleased to be back with you.
All right. Well, anything else you'd like to add before we conclude?
I think we covered most of it. I think we're ready to, we really do now have a lot of confidence that we know what to do in protecting the distribution grid. And I think we just need to get that message around and get others to repeat what we've done. I mean, that's all I would say.
That's true. That's true. So I'll be posting this video on the 21st. So you can look for it then.
Okay.
You know, I'll pick a time when it should perform best. And for everybody, I really appreciate everyone watching. We're going to conclude the video now, and we can chat for just a moment here, Hank. So everyone, thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, bang up that notification bell, click all. There's going to be more of this to come and other things that can teach you how to survive, thrive, and stay out of the hive, how to grow your own food, how to do many things that you're going to need to be able to do should the grid go down. I cover these things, but let's try to work to keep it from happening in the first place. That is the goal. That's what we're about here. And to that tune, I say thank you for watching.